Relationship and conscious parenting coach is someone who essentially looks at your inner triggers and your inner child wounds. We look at how that creates a disconnection in the self from the authentic self. That disconnection is what then creates a disconnection in our relationships today. It's quite common that if a client comes to me and they've got an issue with their partner, they usually have an issue with the child as well. It's coming from the same wound. You know, the childhood wound is where these issues come from. And we're playing out our relationship and our dynamics with whoever it is in the present day from that wounded place. So that's why it may show up in multiple relationships.
What about situations that come up where there clearly has been some wrongdoing, whether it's cheating or lying?
This is getting quite deep here, but what I would say is, and this isn't a popular opinion, but we might be saying, oh, the partner's cheated on us, or the partner's been lying or doing this or doing that. But the question becomes, and I'm not going to be popular for this.
Sharne, I'd like to welcome you to the I Don't Know podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You work as a relationship and conscious parenting coach. Why don't you tell me how you would define a relationship and conscious parenting coach?
Yeah, sure. So a relationship and conscious parenting coach is someone who essentially looks at your inner triggers and your inner child wounds. And what we do is we look at how that creates a disconnection in the self from the authentic self. So the idea is those inner child wounds and those experiences we had created a disconnection from who we authentically were. And that disconnection is what then creates a disconnection in our relationships today.
Okay.
And so what we would do then is we would look at healing those wounds, healing those inner child wounds. And when we heal those inner child wounds, we essentially reconnect you back to the self, because you're no longer acting from the wounded place in the relationship, but from your present day self. And that is where the magic happens. That's like, wow, you know, when I see my clients reconnect back to themselves and heal those other parts of them, they can relationship and parent in a completely different ways, like joy, abundance, you know, real connection and a sense of calm. Because the angry parts of us are usually coming from like an angered inner child part.
Right. Why those two specific areas? Did you see them as already something that connected before, or was there something else that drew you?
The two definitely connect, relationship and parenting, both connect, but both were very important in my own life. So it was the case of growing up, I got to my kind of mid to late teens and relationships started to become an issue, especially with my mother. So there was like a really kind of turbulent period, and there was a lot of anger, a lot of anxiety within me. And I didn't really know where it was coming from, but it got me really curious. And then at the age of 11, I unfortunately lost my dad to suicide. So there was like a huge abandonment wound within me, you know, and all the anger and the fear of being left, all the anxiety kind of stored up in my body, stored up. And then it was like, coming out. And it was coming out in the relationship with my mum, who also had trauma. So her trauma was interplaying with mine. She, obviously having lost her husband, became very codependent with me. So there was no space to grow and breathe and be authentic at that point because she was in such need. And generally, even before that, there's these like very codependent dynamics in Asian families sometimes. And I found that had kind of got me to a point where I felt a little suffocated. There was issues in my own relationship in that respect, starting with my mom. And it was all coming from somewhere. So that began my healing journey where I was like, right, I want to find out where this is coming from because I want to feel better.
And from your own clients, what are the types of relationships that you see come up most that people need help with?
So usually that with their partners and also their kids. And it's quite common that if a client comes to me and they've got an issue with their partner, they usually have an issue with the child as well. And that's because it's coming from the same wound. You know, the childhood wound is where these issues come from. And we're playing out our relationship and our dynamics with whoever it is in the present day from that wounded place. So that's why it may show up in multiple relationships, which is what I found with my clients as well as myself on my own journey.
There are so many different types of parenting books out there, and you've obviously
gone more heavily into the niche of conscious parenting.
So can we talk a little bit about that?
How you got started?
Why that stuck out to you?
Oh, yeah, definitely, yeah. So there's a lot of parenting books out there, and a lot of them focus merely on strategy. So there's a lot of sort of strategy-based stuff, do this with your child, but everything, haven't we, from putting them on the naughty step to speaking with more connection and everything. But the thing about conscious parenting is it deals with the problem from the root. And conscious parenting is also about looking at how you were parented and breaking those generational patterns. It's essentially breaking generational trauma and patterns of how you were parented, so you're not repeating that with your child, or even in the dynamics with your partner. How were your parents when you were a child? And are you repeating similar dynamics with your partner? So conscious relationship coaching or conscious parenting is really looking at the root of the problem and taking it from the root and dealing with it from the root. Whereas other strategies, I think, really are more on the surface type stuff. And I think I did a lot of on the surface type stuff first and then thought, why isn't this working? What really drew me to it was my own experience with my husband. Because in my 20s, it started coming up with my mom, and there was unhealthy ways of dealing with the wounds, like we do, drinking and all other unhealthy ways of kind of coping with it. But with my husband, I realised at that point, something really strange was going on. It was like, there's something else going on here. It was like there was a regressed part of me. So I wasn't showing up as a 30-something adult. This was like the next part of my journey. I'd done therapy and stuff. And now it was like, there's like this regressed part that's fearful, that's scared of being left, that, is insecure, low self-worth, but just like a more childish part, like a childlike part. And I was actually seeing myself quite regressed. And it was that made me think there's something else here. And that's when I got drawn to conscious parenting, because that looks at the inner child. And I discovered that basically all of us have an inner child within us that we are operating from in the present day on some level. Okay. And then I was like, oh my God, that's that regressed part that I'm seeing. It's the inner child part. And I saw it in my partner as well. He had more of a teenage part.
I'm really interested about that regress period you're going through. Was there any significant change that brought that on?
Yeah, so actually it's a really good question, because it started before I was married and I moved to Germany. And I moved from here to Germany, and it was like as the first time I'd kind of moved away from the family I grew up with. It's the first time I went to another country. And that would be fine if I was like a healthy, fully fledged adult, which I thought I was. Apparently I wasn't. And I got there. It was a bit controversial that I was moving abroad, not being married, with my boyfriend at the time. There was some anxiety that I wasn't being the good girl anymore. And this is the other thing about conscious parenting, is it helps you release the role, the role of the good girl. I have to play this part.
Yeah. Like
that dual role that we play. And that was what was ripping away from me, was that good girl role that I've played. So I got there, and you asked me what brought on this progression.
Yeah.
Well, I think it was that separation, It was the fact that I'd made my mum unhappy. The little girl within me thought that maybe she wasn't keeping mum feeling okay. And that kind of became her job, especially after my dad passed away. So there was a sense of guilt and anxiety that I wasn't, that she may not be okay. And what I do is a recipe for her happiness. And there was this unhealthy connection that made me panic that I was doing something wrong. But not just that just taking a small child abroad, because I remember going to see somebody, a therapist, and they got out this piece of paper that had all different, those fan papers you make with kids. And they sort of fan out, and there's all lots of people holding hands. Okay, where's it going with this? And then he was like, so you've got all these different parts within you. And your inner child is freaking out because you've taken her abroad. And it's that abandonment again. It's that abandonment wound. Like my dad left when I was 11. I'm abandoned. I'm in another country. So it was actually the 11-year-old part that was freaking out that I'm on my own, here in this country, and was scared. Everything's different. So that's what brought it on, really.
How is it that people can recognise their inner child? How can they identify where those thoughts or feelings or anxiety are coming from?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So the signs are basically having anxiety or having some sort of depression, or thoughts that are taking you into feeling like you're not enough, feeling worthless, not having purpose. All of these things are a sign that you have become disconnected from your authentic self. That is essentially there between the ages of 0 to 7 by kids, but it gets crushed because they feel they have to play a role, right? So it is there, but the authentic self has become buried. So I would say if they're having any signs of not feeling like they have purpose and triggering in their relationships is a huge sign. This is all a sign that their inner child is calling for help. How to recognize that part is through really to a deep exploration of that part comes from inner child healing, which is facilitated through somebody like myself or a therapist that can really take you into the inner part of the psyche so that you can meet that part. It's very powerful work. It's like you can actually meet them and recognize them. But on the surface, they're the kind of signs you'd get in everyday life, like a general feeling of dissatisfaction, problems in a relationship. It's usually a sign that there's like a part that's been left in our psyche unattended. And, you know, it's like brushing your teeth. You've got to attend to it, right?
Yeah, that's so interesting. It feels that you start off being just super conscious with where your moves start to change. A lot of the time, a lot of people are just kind of on autopilot a little bit.
We're all on autopilot. And this is where my journey began at the beginning with mindfulness, because I took mindfulness courses and that's what taught me, I'm on autopilot. Like, you know, have you ever had that feeling when you drink your tea, you just put it down something, you can't remember where you put it down? It's legit, there's no awareness.
Yeah, I get it with my phone. I would go on my phone and suddenly I'm in TikTok and I'm scrolling and I'm like, why did I go into my phone? There was something work-related I had to do and I've just been distracted from it.
Yeah, exactly. So we're just on autopilot. We don't have the awareness that, something is amiss here. And it usually takes like something really painful, like arguments with your partner or issues with your child or something to actually like prod you awake out of that autopilot and say, here you go, wake up, there's something there that needs your tending to. And that's why I say, like, you know, it really is through pain that we evolve and we become aware.
Something I thought was really interesting about your journey is that before you even got into this, you were working full-time as a primary school teacher.
Yes.
I'm really intrigued to know, what is it that motivates somebody to go from a profession that's quite stable to something that's not just completely different, but also where you're starting from the bottom?
Yeah, well, mainly my passion, you know, my passion for having experienced that pain, that inner child pain of just feeling like lost. I just don't want any other soul to feel like that. So it was my passion that took me to do this in my business. But in terms of primary school teaching, it was very much part of my journey as well. Because if you walk into a primary school, you'll see lots of children behaving as they should, you know, cardboard cutouts, which is not what conscious parenting is about. It's about like really celebrating that authentic nature of the child. And I could tell these kids couldn't be themselves. And some of those kids, especially sensitive ones, it was causing them anxiety, you know? There was something amiss. It's like, there's those kids that if they can't be themselves, they can't express the way they want to express. My son's one of them, by the way. Then, you know, there's going to be behaviours that show up and there's going to be adverse behaviours, as society would call it, and anxiety. And then I started to become more intrigued by those children in my class, the ones that had anxiety, the ones that had symptoms that resembled like ADHD type symptoms and things like that. The security of the job was one thing, and it did take some bravery to kind of move. But I think my disconnection with the system and how it's just creating all these cardboard cutout type kids where they can't be themselves was enough for me to come out of it, because I wanted to be in a job where it matched my own authenticity and my own beliefs about children. So that was one aspect. But also these kids, they really needed my help, you know, these ones with the emotional behavioural issues. So I moved from being a primary school teacher into being a coach for kids first. I was an emotional behavioural coach for kids. And that's what then just sparked my passion, because I could feel as I was talking to them and helping them, my own inner child was benefiting. And that's what then led me to like, it's all about the inner child. It's also very much about the parents, because we need to have, it starts from there, you know, it starts from our parenting. So yeah, I just got more passionate about that. And that became more important than, you know, having stability and things like that, which surprised me, because my dad, the whole issue that really got him down, was financial stability.
Right.
So it was a challenge to move over, but I'm so glad that I did it because I wouldn't change for the world now what I do.
You mentioned your dad having those feelings of financial stability. Was that also something that you had as well?
Yes, definitely. Patterns repeat, wounds repeat. So by looking very deeply at my parents, I could understand a lot about myself, which is what conscious parenting does. It helps you to find out the source of why you are the way you are. And I looked at how my dad was and realized, there was so much fear that was created around money. We were going to lose our house when I was 11. So it was going to be possessed. And he was trying to find a way out of that problem, which, he got depressed and took his own life. But for the longest time, I thought that's why he did it, was because of money. And I've been on this journey for a while now, and I continue to stay on it, and I'm always remain curious about my makeup. And quite recently in my journey, I kind of realized that what I'd been told that it was because of money that he took his own life was actually just complete rubbish. I'd realized that I was told that growing up, but essentially everything comes from an inner child wound.
Yeah.
So it was his sense of not feeling good enough and not feeling like he could get out of the problem, not feeling like he was worthy enough. It came down to self-worth. That really meant that when those financial problems came up, he just didn't feel good enough and didn't feel worthy enough to make his way out of it. And that started in childhood. So that's what, again, made me realize that it wasn't really the circumstances of money or financial problems. It's how we approach that, and whether we're approaching it from the wounded self or from our adult self and our more healed version of ourselves that knows that problems will come and we'll get over them. So now it's been very challenging for me to work through my money trauma, but it's certainly something that I had to do.
All the work that you've been doing, well, you've clearly developed a different perspective on was quite a personal time in your life.
Yeah.
I want to move on slightly to relationships more between partners.
Yes.
What's some of the common areas that you find keep coming up when it comes to modern day relationships?
Usually it's a sense of not feeling heard in the relationship. There's low self-worth. There's two different types of people, I would say, that come to me. It's those that are either really struggling with speaking up in the relationship.
Okay.
They're struggling to set boundaries, and they're struggling to say what it is that's important to them, what they need. And there's those that are reactive and communicating that in a very reactive way because they actually feel that it's a threat when the partner isn't meeting their needs.
Okay.
And again, that comes really down to the fact that the need wasn't met in childhood. So it's not for the partner to meet, it's a need from childhood.
Right.
So these people are displacing the inner child need onto the partner, and they're becoming very reactive with them. So the most common thing I see is, arguments, anger, defense, lots of defense. We've got really high defenses because we don't want to be hurt. So we don't want that inner child wound to be re-triggered through the partner. So we have very high defenses, blaming, a lot of blaming and shaming. But yeah, the biggest issue is not feeling heard and really a sense of over-relying on the partner for our sense of self-worth.
Tell us more about how you work with clients. Is there anything that you can give advice to people that are listening?
So I would say if you feel that you have got an inner child wound that might be showing up in your relationship, or there's some sort of disconnection there, or you're feeling some sort of unhappiness, the best thing that you can start to do is journal and really bring up awareness.
Okay.
To really become, we said earlier, it's like you're on autopilot. What we want to do is want to break that kind of autopilot and bring this acute awareness and observing mind of what's going on without getting caught up in the story of what's going on.
Okay.
Because, when we get caught up in the story of, like my partner did this, then he did that, then he did this, or my kid's doing this, and then they did that. Then all we're doing is we're reactivating our nervous system and we're re-triggering ourselves. So what we want to do is want to detach from the story. Sometimes we get out on paper, we put it in front of us. We can say, what about this is really fact and truth?
Mm-hmm.
Or what about this is me trying to protect myself? Or what about this is me trying to blame the other because it feels too scary that it could be my fault? Maybe you're blamed a lot in childhood, or maybe you're always trying to be the good girl, so you don't want to feel like it's your fault, so you're putting it onto the other. So it can be really interesting just to start journaling, I would say, and really start to raise your awareness from the kind of observer's perspective. Like, come out of the problem. Imagine yourself standing outside of it and looking on and what's happening here, why, and where did it start? And that's the start of really clearing out the crap so you can live a really abundant life in your present day.
What about situations that come up where there clearly has been some wrongdoing, whether it's cheating or lying? How do you begin to tackle those types of issues?
So this is getting quite deep here, but what I would say is, and this isn't a popular opinion, but we all have a blueprint for a relationship. So this blueprint was decided in childhood, an emotional blueprint for a relationship. So say, for example, we have one person who is a giver and another person who is more of a taker. And that was a dynamic in either your relationship with your parent or between your parents or something like that. Or one that was maybe distrusting of the other or whatever, or there was something that the other hid. And you pick up these dynamics from your parents. And therefore, subconsciously, we go and choose something similar. Right? So we might be saying, oh, the partner's cheated on us, or the partner's been lying or doing this or doing that. But the question becomes, and I'm not going to be popular for this, but how did you subconsciously choose that? How was the blueprint already in place from there? So it meant that you were attracted to that this time. Because like some people, they get into relationships and like, oh, I've got another relationship with someone cheated on me. Another one. The blueprint was already put place in our childhood. That doesn't mean we blame ourselves for it, but it's actually a great thing because we can take ownership for the blueprint and change the blueprint. Okay. And then you will change the dynamics that you're experiencing in the present day relationship. So in some way, we're always co-creating what we're experiencing. Even things like cheating, we may have attracted someone of that nature because there was something somewhere that was similar to that. It may not be that your dad cheated on your mom. It might be, you felt deceived in childhood. It might be there was a lot of lies. There was a lot of not telling you everything, a lot of making out everything was all cool, and shoving everything under the carpet. It's just sometimes there's a similarity of it's okay for me to feel this way, so I will attract someone that will treat me that way because it's how I was programmed.
I'm also intrigued to know how much environment plays into that, not just your friends or your extended family, but also just culturally what you see and what type of content and TV shows you watch. I just wonder sometimes how much that also impacts you when you're growing up.
Oh yeah, I think so, 100%. I actually getting quite aware of wanting my relationship to look a little bit like, a Bollywood movie or some sort of like, those chick flicks you watch and stuff. Definitely think media does play a huge influence, and also
like the Disney complex. Yeah, say that that has a massive impact.
Yeah, yes, the Disney complex. I'm so glad that female characters are becoming a little bit more showing their inner power, rather than being saved by a man. I think I was definitely waiting to be saved.
Yeah,
that was a big problem. Waiting for my husband to save me.
Knight in shining armour.
Yeah, doesn't exist. These romanticized ideas are actually part of the problem. So society definitely plays an impact. It's recognizing not just the conditions of your upbringing, but the conditioning in society and being brave enough to say, are these conditions any match for my authentic self? If they're not, then it's time to break away from them, which is hard. I've done it and it's not easy, and you may lose people, you may lose things, but essentially the happiness that comes from that, from living in your authentic self, is priceless.
A big part of this podcast is about being open on some of the things that we don't know. And I'm really intrigued to know about something that you know now at this point in your journey that you really didn't know in the beginning.
Okay, something I know now that I didn't know at the start is trauma isn't what happened to you. It's basically how you processed it or how you experienced it. So a lot of people think trauma is only significant if, say, like me, my dad committed suicide. Oh, therefore trauma happened to you, and that's significant. You have a right to be this way. What I've learned through this journey that I didn't know at the beginning is trauma has nothing to do with the event itself, but it's actually how you process that event. It's actually how that event affected the individual. So you could have an event that seems less important or less significant, but it could have just as a profound effect as an event that seems more traumatic. So that was when I found that out, I was like, wow. So, it's not significant what happened to you, it's how you process it. So everybody's trauma is valid. Yeah. And that also, trauma is, it just means disconnection. A lot of people think trauma is a strong word, but I didn't know this, but trauma just means disconnection, a disconnection from the self.
That's really cool. So it'd be really good for people to know more about where they can find you online and learn more about your programs.
Yeah, sure. So you can find me at www.sharnepatel.com. That's my website. I'm also on TikTok, so you can find me there.
Well, look, thank you so much
You're welcome.
for answering all these questions. It's, we dived into these topics and I feel like I've learned a lot as well. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you for having me.